I've gotten really good at getting this down to just a couple minutes instead of the hour it could be.
Hello, and welcome to Education Matters. I'm your host, Harry Jackson. Today, we have a special guest, Mr. Matthew Chappell, who's running for Congress in Virginia's 11th District. Mr. Chappell, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Harry. I'm very excited to be here.
We're happy to have you here, sir. So, sir, tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us a bit of your biography. Who are you?
I'm an Army veteran. I served 8 years in the U.S. Army. I'm the only combat veteran in the race. I spent 1 year in Iraq, 3 years in Afghanistan. I'm also a former police officer and a former senior counterintelligence officer for the Department of Defense. So my background's in public service, law enforcement, national security, very passionate about those things. I'm also a really proud husband and a father of 3 young children who are going through the Fairfax County school system. So that's very near and dear to the heart. I've seen everything you've been doing out there, Oscar Namani and the others, and your work is just outstanding. I look up to you, and I want to do everything I can to help as well. I'm going to school board meetings myself. I'm very outspoken against Steve Descano and his targeting of parents like you, and I just want to do everything I can to help.
Well, sir, thank you. So let's go into that. I mean, so just for the host, I'm also a former intelligence officer as well after 20 years. And in fact, I was a professor at National Intelligence University where, we teach members of the intel community from NSA, CIA, NGA, and the like. So going into that, let's talk about your origin story. Like, why did you decide to run for Congress? And why? And let's talk about the education space specifically. Like, what motivated you? What is driving you to run to serve our community?
I've gotten really good at getting this down to just a couple minutes instead of the hour it could be. But I'm really big on keeping the family unit together. When I was a young child, my mother and I were abused by my biological father. It was a pretty bad situation, horrific, really. The worst you can imagine if you want. I don't want to go into it too much. It's not really fit for TV. But my mom is a very strong woman, and if it weren't for the Second Amendment and her strength, I wouldn't be here today. She got us out of that situation, ended up remarrying. That was one of the happiest days of my life when I really found a father and my family felt whole. And mom, we went from living in a trailer and mom working 3 to 4 jobs trying to get by to her being a teacher. So that was a really proud moment for us. Mom's still teaching to this day. She refuses to retire. She loves it. And when I was 17 years old, I decided it was time to join the Army. I wanted to serve the people like the man I consider my father was doing. I also wanted to be a police officer, so I made both of those things happen. And the real kicker for me was the Afghanistan withdrawal. I think that was one of our biggest foreign policy blunders of all time, and unfortunately, we just continue down that path. We're an embarrassment on the international stage right now. And then as your issue when Steve Descano went after you, and when I saw the way parents were being treated in Fairfax County by the school system, by law enforcement, it sickened me. And with my 3 young children going through that system, I figured it was time for me to stand up and do something. I got tired of yelling at the TV, yelling at the computer, and I'm ready to go yell at Jerry Connolly now.
Well, we wish you the best for that one. I mean, so I think most of the audience wasn't knowing when you're referring to Steve Descano. So this is a nationwide network. So, who is Steve Descano? What does he do? Right. We're talking about my case. So what just so people are aware for context.
Yeah, so for Fairfax County, he's our Commonwealth attorney, which in a lot of states like where I grew up, Florida and Georgia, you would refer to it as your district attorney or state's attorney. Mm. He's supposed to be a prosecutor. He's supposed to be a man that stands for justice, and he's the exact opposite. He's letting real criminals off in the name of equity and equal outcomes. He's not prosecuting men who are abusing their wives. He is instead choosing to target parents who are upset with the way their children are being brought up in the school system. The school doesn't. One thing that they don't seem to understand is the school doesn't own our children. They're not property of the state. They're our children, and when these people are going out there trying to, quite frankly, groom and indoctrinate our children to their way of thinking, it's a problem, and we're going to stand up. And people like Steve Descano, who is often referred to as a rogue prosecutor, they're getting in the way of that, and it's basically open war on parents now. And I'm ready to stand up and fight beside you.
Thank you. And thank you for the reference. What Mr. Chappell was referencing to was I reported or tweeted about inappropriate contact between a education activist and a minor, and I was prosecuted for criminal libel and slander charges. I ended up prevailing in that matter. You can find more about that particular case to read on our website. As to the ordeal that I went through, being persecuted for over 7 months, having my First Amendment rights infringed upon when I spoke about a child safety issue. But it's thankfully for the men such as you, Mr. Chappell, are willing to stand up to our community, that are willing to help support parents and help defend and protect our children. And thank you, sir.
Well, Harry, people like you are the ones that gave me the courage to finally do it. So I appreciate you.
Thank you. So let's talk about some current issues in education. What are some issues in education that we need that are there? What are the, just talk about the issues. We won't go about root causes, but what are the issues we see in the education space today?
Well, I know we're going to get to our new superintendent in Fairfax County, but she's tied into
we do
a lot
need
of
to talk about that.
She's tied into a lot of them, like closing schools. Our children need to be in school. It's not an opinion that students perform better when they're in school. They simply do. It's a fact. They need to be in school. They need to be learning. And then CRT, another issue. My son doesn't need to be growing up feeling guilty for being born a white male. He didn't ask to be born a white male. He's never going to apologize for it either. We are who we are, and he has no reason to feel guilty for that. And then
what is critical race theory?
Critical race theory is a racist ideology. It is oppressive to minorities. You have minorities growing up that if they're going to be taught this critical race theory, they're being taught that they're constantly oppressed, that they need someone like these woke activists on the left, woke politicians, to help them get through the world. And they don't need somebody to carry them through the world. They can do anything they want. Our former president, Barack Obama, proved that. People continue to prove it every day. My wife is a senior manager for a huge corporate global interest. You know, anybody in America can be who they want if they apply themselves and work hard. And this kind of ideology is teaching them that they can't, that they're oppressed, they won't ever make it, and unless they get handouts, and that's simply wrong.
Are there other issues that also try to tie on to this, to the Black struggle per se? They're also concerning.
Can you give me an example, please?
I was thinking about the LGBT transgender policies that you tend to. Okay.
Yes, the transgender.
Yes.
I apologize. I take a big issue with that. I might be slightly delayed, Harry. I'm sorry. I keep cutting you off.
That's fine. Sorry.
Like transgenders and so we all saw the Loudoun County thing where there's such a move right now to normalize that movement that they even covered up sexual assaults in the school, which is completely unacceptable. But then you also get into the transgenders participating in women's sports. Women around the globe, whether they be Republican, Libertarian, Green Party, Democrat, they have been fighting for decades to have a place in society, to have their own voice, to be equal to men. And it's in the past couple of years with this woke movement, it's being taken away from them. You've got all these swimmers who have come out against Leah Thomas and said, hey, we're bothered by this. This person went through puberty, grew up to be a man, and is competing and just destroying us in these races. It's an issue. It's my wife has struggled in corporate America to make it to where she is. She's been told women don't belong in operations environment. Women who have children don't do well here. You don't put in the same amount of hours because you want to take care of your family and stuff. So women have still been fighting to be equal with us men, and now they have to fight against, well, quite frankly, us men again. So I find a huge issue there.
Also, it might be a safety issue as well, considering if it's contact sports, say soccer, basketball, volleyball. I mean, there's I'm thinking softball. I mean, that might be very hard to, even at the K through 12 level, to officiate even effectively. I'm a lacrosse referee for the last 18 years in the area.
I played defensive end in football, and I can't imagine hitting one of my girls. That'd be
exactly.
it'd be disastrous.
It'd be very disastrous. All right, so you mentioned the superintendent. So remember, we're across the nation here. So what's going on with Fairfax, the superintendent's race? What was the issue there? What did they do when we talk about the superintendent, Fairfax County superintendent?
Right, and you'll be able to speak to this even better than I can. But from the research I was doing, because obviously I'm invested in what's going on right now too with my children, and I never thought I'd say I'm going to miss Scott Brabrand, but that's just how bad this lady's looking right now. When you've got the LGBTQ groups, the NAACP of Fairfax, and the GOP joining together and protesting this and speaking out about it, it's an issue. She's coming from a really small school system that is about the size of just our faculty and staff in Fairfax County. That's an issue all on its own.
Just one district.
Right, exactly. She's not anywhere near qualified to run a school system of our size. And it's really clear why they're doing it. They held their selection process, questioning, and confirmation all in the same night. It's open war against parents. They're committed to it. Her policies at her old school were disastrous. She was the first to close down for COVID, the last to open back up, and it showed in their grades. Their grades slipped terribly. The children from the school system she's coming from, congratulations to the parents there. Your children likely have a much better future. I'm sorry that we had to take her off of your hands, though. And it's
in the name of equity. In the name of equity, how is she towards minorities? Okay, how is she towards minorities? Okay,
towards minorities, she's just imagine the wokest white woman you can. She has just like TJ. So it's a really good.
I'm glad you said that.
Right there. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
she's demonstrated anti-Asian ideology in her own. Asians in her district were heavily discriminated upon, and I'm sure she's rooting for the Supreme Court to rule in favor of TJ's racist policy, because she's just got a steady record of similar behavior.
Similar behavior, and we don't understand why it is. I mean, I've been seeing reports where she was actually arguing against decreasing the number of Asian Americans in advanced academic programs in her former school district. And then we have this mess that we have here in Thomas Jefferson School for Science and Technology, which case is going now before the Supreme Court. We're going to hear any moment, any day now from Chief Justice Roberts, whether or not he will vacate a stay that was filed by Fairfax County Public Schools that would prohibit the Fairfax County Schools from continuing on with a racist admissions policy that Justice Hilton had ruled earlier in district court earlier this year. So we have this new superintendent. It seems that her new ideology, it seems like her only qualification, quite frankly, was that she was one, white and woke. Would you agree? I mean,
I do agree.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's like, our school board pretty much proved that, white privilege is an issue, and they proved it to us. Mm-hmm. They proved it. They also did, as you pointed out, they got our community together. I mean, they have Fairfax GOP, NAACP, the Latino community, and the Black community all together in opposition against this candidate. We wanted to
guess
succeed.
We owe him a thanks for that.
We do. I do. It's just amazing under the wrong circumstances of getting the community together. And last night's school board meeting was surreal. Seeing people that you've been butting heads with for 2 years, all of a sudden say, let's have a peace offering, and because this is a problem. And that was amazing. It just makes you wonder who influenced the school board to make that selection. It really is something that's incredible. So what are some of the how did we get here? What were some of the root causes as to what led to this mess, to this wokeness that is infesting into education with indoctrination. What led to this?
I think on that quite often, actually, when I'm driving to and from work or laying in bed at night. And I think it's because we wanted to be so tolerant. We were so quiet for so long. We didn't want to offend anybody, and we let it go too far. Like, we should have stepped in a long time ago and realized, it's not about tolerance and being offensive. It's about protecting our future and our children. And we didn't do that. We were silent, and it's time for us to stop that.
Yeah, it does seem like they kind of want us to move towards, and even last night's school board meeting where they say tolerance and acceptance. I heard acceptance was viewed as the bare minimum, which I find kind of interesting, because now they're wanting for affirmation, which is they want to compel you to do something, which is, we have rights as Americans. I mean, we should be accepting and I think tolerance is the bare minimum. Acceptance is like you kind of where you want to be, but affirmation of everything, every lifestyle, even those we don't approve. No, this is a free country. We have the freedom of speech.
Yeah, we
have the Second Amendment. Yeah,
we simply don't have to like what we don't want to like.
Exactly. That's the appeal of the GOP perspective. You can be you, I can be me. We can still get along. It's not an issue.
I do think the GOP that we need to improve our messaging on that. We are always preaching limited government, and sometimes we don't we don't make a point to let our friends on the left understand that applies to you too. We don't want to mess with you. We don't want the government messing with you. We want freedom for all Americans, and we need to do a better job of communicating that.
Well, hopefully we can use this platform will help educate our audience to that on that point. So I guess kind of like this led us down this path, right? Where now we have this wokeness that's sweeping across the country. It's not just Fairfax County. It's in New York. It's in San Francisco. It's in school districts. It's impacting the quality of our education. It's even impacting Disney. I mean, with education, where Governor DeSantis had passed a bill where it said, hey, you should not, as a teacher, you should not be talking with kindergartners through third graders, kids 5 through 8, about their sexual preferences. That's just inappropriate. I think a reasonable person can accept that. I mean,
right.
We really don't, kids at that age don't need to accept that. Or you have this even material in the pre-K where they call babies racist, which is whoever wrote that obviously doesn't have kids and certainly never took them to the playground where kids are just playing. I mean, that's something that, that's something that happens when kids learn when they're older. They'll probably learn from their parents, but you send your kid to a playground, to preschool, they have no idea what's going on.
There's no like shock of, oh, that person's a different color than me or anything. It's just normal to them.
Yeah. I mean, in the simple game of playing tag, and they're running around, and it seems like they just want to taint that type of that innocence for whatever sick purpose they have. So let's talk about what are some solutions to some of these ills, particularly in the education space. We talked about the problems, some of the root causes. What are some of the what is your vision on how to resolve some of these issues?
Well, I think more states need to follow in Governor DeSantis' steps with that. They want to blow it out of proportion and call it a "Don't Say Gay" bill, which it doesn't say that anywhere in it. Read the bills, please. Don't trust what your CNN is putting forth as the word, because it's not. And because if you want to go that route, you could say it's the "Don't Stay Straight" bill either, because it's all sex talk in the schools. And I agree with it completely. If you want to have those talks with your children at home, it's your right as a parent. And that's what we're trying to say is in the GOP is parents deserve to raise their children the way they want. Teachers shouldn't be doing it. When I was growing up, I never knew anything about my teachers' relationships. I would have never known if any of my teachers were straight, gay, bisexual, and it didn't matter. It shouldn't matter. You're there. We do need to hold the teachers accountable too. You're there to teach our children, to set them up for success and set this country up for success. You're not there to indoctrinate them into your political views. There should not be politics in school. It should be focused solely on education, and our states really need to put the hammer down on that.
So let's just go in there. Let's move a little bit more to address some of the concerns here. So what if you're playing devil's advocate? All right, say if you're a kindergarten teacher and you're saying, "Hey, I have to have a connection with my students and build a relationship." I mean, I still remember my third grade teacher, Mrs. Falk, my favorite teacher. I'm 45 years old, so I still remember her. Does that bill any way limit a teacher from forming a connection with their students about talking about what they do or where they live or what they did over the weekend when they're meeting up for class on Monday?
No, it absolutely doesn't. And I can give you an example on my background as a counterintelligence agent in Afghanistan. One of my big jobs was to empathize with the Afghan sitting across from me, and it's easy to do. I don't live the same culture they do, and for the record, I worked with a lot of gay soldiers partners, and they didn't go into the booth and talk about their sexuality with the Afghans. That would be a big a big barrier, actually. But we can empathize in other ways. We can talk about the things we did. I would talk about playing soccer. They love soccer. The kids, it's very similar with our children here. You can talk about what you did during the weekend. There's no reason to bring in your sex life or your gender identity to it. And I don't understand. I've thought about it. You say play devil's advocate. I thought about it in many different ways. I don't understand the appeal of talking about your sexuality or your gender identity to a 6-year-old. That's not even your child.
It's not even your child, and for some reason, there's a movement advocating to do that. And as parents, it's understandable to have a problem with that. Yeah. So, what are some of the policies that you'd like to pursue if elected?
So being a Federalist, there's a lot of this I want to leave to the states. I believe a lot of this is truly state rights issues. But at the same time, as federal congressmen, we can still affect these things. We can still speak to our local leaders and say, because we have a large following. If you look at the people that come out and vote for our school board, it's a much smaller population than it is the people that are going to be voting for me and Jerry Connolly in November. We still have a lot of people we can affect through our talking, and that's what I would like to do, because I am for limited government in the federal aspect. But I do believe our state legislature should be separating our genders in the sports. We should be outlawing CRT and everything we've talked about. But I'm very firm on leaving it to the states. I believe if it gets to a point where we're facing like severe discrimination or something that I truly believe is grooming for any sort of sexual ideology, pedophilia, or anything, then perhaps the federal government will need to step in. But I'd like to see it not get that far. I'd like to see our state step up the right way. Our locally elected leaders and our federally elected leaders need to be getting together and working on these issues, and they need to be listening to their constituents.
So let's talk about the devil's advocate. We talk about CRT and they talk about race.
Sure.
Does not talking about CRT mean that institutional racism doesn't exist or inherent bias doesn't exist?
No, absolutely not. The institutionalized racism, inherent bias, it is factual. We know we have a dirty past. We know racism still exists. We see it every day. And we don't need CRT to remind us of that. I'm not saying don't continue to teach our past. We should absolutely be teaching it. We shouldn't be rewriting it. I believe that's what CRT is effectively doing, is rewriting our past into a different narrative.
Different narrative, and also some of the scholars of it believe with using what they believe to be positive discrimination. Using discrimination against one race or another to correct past ills, which creates other problems, and then you just have to have future discrimination. So we're in a continual cycle of discrimination, one group against another.
It is, and another sad reality is people often say the sins of our fathers, your fathers. Well, my family is all immigrants, so is my wife's family. My family's Irish immigrants, so we were treated very badly. Also, I'm not trying to compare the two because it's a very different treatment, but I don't want to get lumped in with what occurred in America before my family ever came here. I don't want my children to be taught that they're at fault for that, because they weren't. They're a new generation, and they have a chance to make the world everything Martin Luther King ever wanted it to be, that my family has wanted it to be. So I'm really against it, the way that stuff's being taught.
You mentioned one of the four pillars of the woke ideology. One of it is that discrimination exists, which I think you and I both agree that it does in some forms, but CRT certainly isn't the answer. And then we talk about that only certain groups can identify what those. That's the second pillar. Only certain groups can identify the discrimination. I think this is kind of like where you and I also are pointing and highlighting to our audience that you can't put a hierarchy on human suffering or what challenges a person had to endure. I mean, you shared with us your origin story, your family situation, and even like your family situation going back before being Irish. Like the Irish in this country were discriminated against, ruthlessly in this country. So everyone has an origin story. Everyone has had to deal with adversity, but they're able to rise to it,
Right.
through meritocracy. And I think we also talked about the third one, which was using discrimination, which we see where that leads to. Let's talk about the fourth pillar we talk about with CRT and woke ideology, where they believe that censorship is necessary. We talk about limited government. What is your position with transparency, some of the issues we see to limit transparency, and what can be done about that?
I hate the censorship movement, and I will openly profess my love for Elon Musk. I think the guy's amazing. Please keep doing what you're doing. It's human to disagree. Disagreements is a really good thing, and you shouldn't, when your neighbor disagrees with you and says, "Hey, I don't like what you're doing." That's okay. You should be able to communicate through those issues and find common ground. And if you can't find common ground, you're not going to on everything. That doesn't mean that you suddenly disagree on 100% of the topics. But disagreement's totally fine. And I don't know why we got to this point where I don't like what you said, so I'm going to delete your entire social media life and you can't say anything anymore. It's ridiculous to me.
Okay, so there's an issue dealing with discipline inequities within our school system, particularly with school resource officers. And there is one school of thought that thinks that SROs, school resource officers, should not be in schools. Another one thinks that they absolutely should be for student safety. And now we're going to start talking about with Mr. Chappell what his thoughts are on the matter, his expertise, particularly as a law enforcement officer. Mr. Chappell, what is your thought on the school of thought of school resource officers? Are they necessary? Are they not necessary? Your take, sir.
I believe SROs are necessary, and I'm a big supporter of them. My sister is an SRO in Florida, actually, and I think she does a great job. She's loved by teachers, she's loved by students, and she's genuinely invested in their safety. And I think it's important that your SROs are well trained, not just in their basic law enforcement duties, but they need additional training. Excuse me. They need additional training as far as crisis intervention, dealing with children, because the academy blocks of instruction on these issues is really low. It needs to be more in depth, and dealing with children is a very unique situation. I've dealt with children in law enforcement. I was never an SRO, but I've gone out and dealt with unruly children that are going through mental health crisis, and it's a different animal. It's a lot harder. So we definitely need additional training there. I know we're not getting into public safety fully, but we need to be looking into increased funding for our police and increased training opportunities, especially those that are going to be in the schools with our children.
So with SROs, on the other side, there's a criticism that that minorities, particularly Black and Hispanic children, are arrested and at disproportionate rates, and is contributing to the school to prison pipeline. And let's talk about that. Are SROs, who often files incidents with SROs? Are they filing incidents themselves that lead to an arrest, or is it someone else that's calling them into a matter?
In my experience, they're usually getting called into a classroom by a teacher or if the incident's already reached the front office, it's an administrator calling the SRO. So the SRO is not going out and about and just like picking out a student based on anything, their race, gender, anything. They're 99% of the time not running into these incidents on their own anyway. They're being called to them. So I would completely dismiss that argument.
All right, so now we're going to talk about the issues with the school to prison pipeline, where with SROs that are leading to arrests at disproportionate rates that are impacting members of the Black and Hispanic community, which is a concern to citizens across the country. And I'm going to ask Mr. Chappell this very important question. Mr. Chappell, there are criticism on the other side that SROs, when in schools, lead to a disproportionate amount of arrests of members of the Black and Hispanic community that are contributing heavily to the school to prison pipeline. Are SROs responsible, and are they a contributing factor to this issue?
No, it's 70% of these situations they're being called to by a school administrator. So they're not out there and initiating contact with the students themselves at all. So I would completely dismiss that. And then near half of these incidents don't lead to an arrest at all. So it's, I would say that's definitely a flawed statistic or a flawed perspective from the other side on that.
So it's mostly the teachers that are overly calling SROs in
right. And one thing that my mother and my mother-in-law have often told me, I didn't mention my mother-in-law earlier, but she's recently retired as a teacher also, is that what they've seen from newer teachers is teachers are having issues controlling their classrooms. They've got to establish that respect in the very beginning and have a good control over their classrooms. And if they establish that, we're not going to be getting into these issues. But at the same time, I don't want to sit here and just go after the teachers. Parents, we need to be responsible for our children. We need to be teaching them the right way at home. We need to be teaching them discipline, respect for their teachers, respect for their fellow students. And I think that's not being done in a lot of cases. We've got to do better.
Excellent. So let's talk about, we talked about school safety. I'm sorry, staying on the topic of SROs. Removing SROs, has that created any issues? Because we've seen some school districts do that.
I haven't looked into those specific issues. I do see that in Fairfax and in a lot of surrounding areas that we have unarmed SROs. And I take issue with that. There is a common misconception on the other side that if you have armed SROs, you're more likely, just the same exact argument, you're more likely to have an issue with the minority, and it's not backed up by facts, quite simply. The reason that so many districts around the nation went to having armed SROs was to deter against school shootings. A lot of these school shootings that were happening in gun-free zones. So when you take I'm a big proponent of the Second Amendment, as I've already said. When you're taking guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens, you're making them a target for people that have no respect for the law. We've got to.
Oh yeah, once you outlaw guns, only outlaws have them.
Yes, and they pick easy targets. They don't want to go into. You don't see a whole lot of gunmen going into the FBI headquarters in Washington D.C. shooting it up. They pick easy targets.
Mr. Chappell, thank you for providing your insight as a law enforcement officer. Transitioning, I'd like to also display your insight as a law enforcement officer, as a counterintelligence professional, regarding some of the school library policies and some of the book issues that we've seen come across the country, particularly with regards to explicit material. There are two books in particular. One book specifically, we'll talk about genderqueer, that has made its way into libraries across the country. It made its way into Loudoun County libraries, Fairfax County's public libraries. Loudoun decided to remove it. Fairfax County has it in its library. What is your opinion? Have you seen this book? What are your thoughts on it?
I have seen it, and first, I'm really glad that you mentioned how Loudoun County removed it and Fairfax hasn't, because that's comical, and just to say the least. Because Loudoun, it's always been like Fairfax, we're trying to catch up to Loudoun and being woke and going just completely far leftist, and we're surpassing them there. The things I saw in those books really disturbed me, and I'm glad we have activists like you and Asra and then Elizabeth Schultz, who's in a great position now, that are going out there and exposing these things, because I would have never known as a parent. And the left, when it was getting put out there, was saying, "Oh, this is completely false. There's no pornography. There's no graphic text or anything like that," and that's absolutely not true. I read them myself. I won't quote a single thing because it's that disturbing. And if I took one of those books into your house, or if you had your children or friends with my children, they came over and they wanted to do a sleepover, and I read them these books as their bedtime story, I would hope that you would go out and file a police report against me, because it's that bad.
So let's talk about that. Your background as a police police officer. With your background, your training and expertise, how do you identify materials such as grooming or pedophilia?
Yeah, so I've worked a lot of those cases. They're the absolute worst to work. I have no sympathy for crimes against children and the offenders that commit those crimes. And this is textbook grooming. They build a comfortable relationship with the child through play dates, through in this case education, which is really disturbing. And you see this like normalization of their behavior. They just sticking to the books, reading these stories that normalize fellatio between a child and a grown man is just it's disgusting. And then the next thing you know, you've got the children thinking this is normal life, and your neighbor suddenly wants to talk about something more personal. It's really textbook grooming, and it's something that we should definitely be steering away against and raising the alarm on. And I can't even explain why they would do such a thing.
So in current society, this is what they're pushing in our school libraries, within your district, 11th District, Lake Braddock, Robinson Secondary School, where these books are even available to children as young as 11 years old. Who are often the victims of these crimes? Are they young girls? Are they young boys?
In my personal history as a law enforcement officer, it's been young boys. And I don't know if that statistic translates here to Virginia. I was not a law enforcement officer in Virginia.
It does translate to national statistics as well. It does translate to mostly young boys are the victims. If an adult were to, say, distribute this material, say at a playground, as a law enforcement officer, would one likely be arrested?
Absolutely. Where I worked, based on the law, you would definitely catch charges for that. And I don't know any judge that I've ever worked with that wouldn't sign a warrant for it.
Thank you.
And I think I'm glad that you asked on the statistics on who's the likelier victim, because that's the exact content that's in these books too. It is geared towards boys, so that's a really good point to tie in that.
Yes, there's imagery within Genderqueer with Plato's Symposium, a depiction within context of back in the Greek era of soldiers that would have boys as sex slaves, and in that book it had a depiction of a asexual teenager fantasizing with a young boy is being fondled by a grown male and appearing to enjoy it. And that is being in books within our secondary schools, where again children as young as 11 can access it. And so, Mr. Chappell, you mentioned before, if you were to distribute this information to at a playground or at a community rec center, you would get arrested. They would be filing charges. And this material, we're having woke activists, push for this, for your children to see this material and to think that it's normal and accepted and push their physical limits. Well, sir, I'm
glad we've got a great. I'm glad we've got a great attorney general now heading things here in Virginia, Jason Miyares. But we need that in our district also, because Descano's out of control, and he's never going to stand up for our children. He's proven that time and time again.
And as you mentioned before, he will threaten to chill parents as well. As we wrap up, sir, any final thoughts for your audience, for your constituents? Why people should vote come this November? Why vote for you?
Absolutely. I say this to, it's pretty easy to get my conservative followers on board, but to the liberals, to the moderates, I think your party's left you at this point. In the GOP, me personally, I really care about the future of your children. I care about you having a say in their future. And if you want somebody that's going to stand up for your children, that's going to actually be involved in these, I would ask you to vote for me, get to know me. My opponent, Jerry Connolly, he's silent on these issues. He's here. He still lives in Fairfax County, but since he's gone on to Congress, he doesn't get involved. He's guilty by his silence. Whether he supports it or not, he needs to get involved. He hasn't. He's proven that he won't, and I will. I will definitely speak up on your behalf. I'll always be your voice. I'm running to be your servant. It's my entire life's been public service, and that's all I want to do. I don't want to lead you. I don't want to rule you. I want to serve you. And if you're interested in learning more about me, you can go to my website. It's chappellforcongress.com, CHAPPELL for congress.com. And I'm happy to talk to anybody. Reach out, send an email. I think you can ask many of my supporters, and they'll tell you the same thing. I talk to everybody personally. My door is always open.
Sir, thank you. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that wraps up another episode. Following in next week, we're actually going to be following up. If you'd like to join us as a guest, please feel free to contact us. As mentioned before, we talked about the travesty that happened with the Fairfax County Superintendent selection. We're actually going to be having in each of our episode updates regarding what happened in Fairfax County, because considering how this was done the wrong way, we're going to talk about this. Did this experiment work? We're going to talk about what went right, what went wrong, and what could have been done better, particularly with Fairfax, because, well, they deserve it. But if there are issues in your specific county, your specific school board, please let us know. We will have you on as a guest to talk about what these issues are, how did it come to be, and what they should have done. Again, I'm Harry Jackson, and this is Education Matters, and thank you for joining us.